Hi, I'm Jasma. Let's make this mini strawberry shortcake with layers of incredibly fluffy Genoise, which is just a sponge cake, filled with chantilly cream, which is just whipped cream, as well as fresh strawberries, which I do not have a more pretentious way of describing. And as always, this is perfectly portioned to make enough cake for one person. Starting with the batter for the Genoise sponge cake, this is my favorite sponge because it has the light and airy texture of a sponge comparable to a chiffon cake. However, it still has the flavor and moisture comparable to a regular oil-based cake, unlike a lot of sponges which kind of just taste like egg. I also simplified the making of this cake, so it's a little different compared to how Genoise sponges are typically made, though I can say that the results have never disappointed me. So that's my sales pitch for this excellent sponge cake recipe. So to get started, whip together the egg and sugar. Another thing I love about this cake is you don't have to separate the egg white from the egg yolk. You just whip up the whole egg and it still gives you a really spongy and light cake. And not that it's difficult to separate an egg and then whip up the egg white and fold the egg yolk in, but it just feels much less complicated. It saves a step and there's less room for things to go wrong. You want to whip this egg until it's as fluffy as it can be. It's not going to be able to hold a peak, but it should be really thick and pale like this. This is the only cake so far that I've made that requires an electric mixer, since a sponge cake relies entirely on the air to give it its texture. But if you would rather make a cake that is done entirely by hand, I have tons of other mini cake recipes and flavor variations that you can try out in my single serving cake series. Now to prepare the dry ingredients, mix together the all-purpose flour, cornstarch, and salt. There are no additional chemical leavening agents in this cake. And then we're going to sift the dry ingredients into the egg. Then to combine the dry ingredients into the egg, I'm using a whisk to fold the batter. Don't be alarmed, it's the exact same concept as if you were to use a spatula to fold, but I think that a whisk does it much more efficiently. It's able to break up the flour faster, which means there's less of a chance of it clumping. You just have to be really gentle with it. Don't stir with the whisk like you normally do. Instead, you want to mimic the folding motions of a spatula and let the batter fall off the whisk naturally. And now for the wet ingredients, we're mixing together some milk, flavorless oil, and vanilla extract. Add a small portion of the batter we just folded into the wet ingredients, and you're welcome to channel all of the energy you held back from folding the batter so gently earlier and stir this as aggressively as you want. In fact, the point of this is to deflate the batter partially. This is known as the sacrificial batter, which sounds kind of dramatic, but really all you're doing is creating kind of a mid-ground between the really light and fluffy batter and dense wet ingredients to make it easier to combine into the rest of the batter without deflating all of it. End it off by scraping the bowl with a spatula because the denser liquids will sink, so you want to make sure that you got everything mixed in there. Then I have my 4-inch cake pan that's lined with the parchment paper on the bottom, and when you pour the batter in, you want to hold it really high so you're kind of dropping it into the cake pan, and this is going to pop the really big air bubbles as you're pouring it in. Then for good measure, swirl a toothpick into the batter. This kind of just evens out the bubbles and makes it a really fine crumb afterwards. And though it may seem a bit excessive at this point in the name of popping air bubbles, I do still tap the cake pan on the counter a couple times. Then I attach my cake strips, which I have prepared to help the cake rise really evenly. You can also use a water bath, and then into the oven this goes. Of course, you want to do your toothpick test to know the cake is done, and once it is, you want to run a butter knife around the sides of the cake pan to loosen it. Be careful here because the cake is so delicate you don't want to break the sides with the knife. Remove the parchment paper on the bottom, sit it upright, and let this cool completely before you level it. I'm cutting the cake in half to create 2 layers and also trimming off the dome. And please just look at how fine the crumb is on this cake. This is why we do a whole 3-step process in removing the air bubbles. Then to prep for the strawberries as the filling for the strawberry shortcake, I just washed my strawberries, patted it dry, removed the stem, and cut them in half. The frosting for this cake is just a basic whipped cream. It kind of complements the really refreshing nature of this cake. The key to success to decorating cakes with whipped cream that does not have anything that stabilizes it is you cannot over whip the cream. You don't want to whip it to the point where it's as stiff as it can go, because at that point it's already over whipped, and as you're working with it, it's going to look really grainy and eventually separate and kind of fall apart. Whip it to around 80% of the way. As soon as the cream can hold a peak, and when you flip the bowl upside down, it won't fall out, that's good. It might feel like you should whip it a little more, but keep in mind that you're gonna have to spread it onto the cake and move it around even more, so you don't want to risk having it kind of start separating while it's on your cake. Okay. Now we decorate.
Side by side we sway there in all the colors. Summer love, lonesome dove, folded on the lawn chair in all the colors. Summer love. Stop giving back. Honeysuckle, fresh cut grass. I could really use some stuff like that. Talk to me and tell me all that you've seen in all the colors. Summer love, memories washed in every shade of green in all the colors. Summer love. Day canoe, bathing in the turquoise blue, losing track of time with you. Another peach pie sunset view.